Hey, welcome. In this lesson, we're going to be setting up the Google Sheet as well as setting up then getting ready to write some Google Apps script and outputting a web app from the Sheet data. So let's go ahead, log into our Google accounts, and then go to the Drive. Under the Drive on the top left-hand side, select New and creating a spreadsheet. So creating a brand new spreadsheet, and we're going to be using the script editor that's going to be bound within the sheet container. So you're going to be using the main sheet as our main object for the data. And I'll just call it live data and then rename the sheet and we'll call it data. And we need to populate the sheet with some information. So let's add in a title and then content, and then we'll have voting up, voting down as options within the content. Let's also populate some dummy content. And this information can be whatever you want. And for testing purposes, you can set up whatever columns and content you want. The most important part is going to be the first row, and the information in the first row. This is going to serve as what the data is, what the column data is, and that's going to also allow us to make updates to the up and the down using our web application we're connecting to the Google script. So what we want to do, we want to output this content as a JSON file so that when we are connecting to it from our web app, we can pick up all of the content using fetch, and then we want to be able to post either up or down depending on what row it is. So we want to get the row number as well as the title, content, and the current values for up and down. So going into under the tools, let's open up the app script editor. So selecting the script editor, that's going to open up the script editor interface. We're going to give it a name and live data web app. So it corresponds with what the sheet is. And in order to open it within our Google Drive, we're only going to see the spreadsheet information. If we go to the apps script, so script.google.com/home, then we're going to see this application by live data web app. I'll make the screen bigger, so increase it to 200%, so easier to read the code as I'm providing it and demonstrating it within the lesson. So it starts out with a default function, and rename this function to doGet. doGet is the function name that Google uses in order to output a web application. So let's also create some content to output within our web application. And we want to get the content from the spreadsheet, so we need to select the sheet object. So set up a variable that's going to contain the spreadsheet object. I'm going to be using SS. You can use whatever value you want. Select the spreadsheet app, and this is where we've got the interaction with the spreadsheet content and that current spreadsheet. And select the function, the method open by ID, and selecting the ID value that we want to use. Each and every Google Doc has its own ID. The easiest way to select the ID is using the ID value that's contained within the URL when you've got the doc open. So I've got the one here. I'm just copying it and create another variable called ID so that we can use the string value for the ID and open it by ID. So that's going to open up the spreadsheet object. And then next we want to select the sheet that we want to use. So in case you want to have multiple sheets, we're going to just use whatever the named sheet is. So now that we've got the spreadsheet object, it can get sheet by name, and then we just need to specify the name of the sheet, which currently is going to be data. And let's wrap this up by outputting the sheet object into the log. So making sure that we've got the right connection, that we're opening it up by ID, and we should see that we've got access to the sheet object. Let's run the code and accept the permissions. And for every time you're running a web app, you do need to accept permissions if you're interacting as that account with any of the other Google services. So review the permissions and go ahead and select the account that you want to use for the permissions. And then under Advanced on the left-hand side, go to the app name, and it's going to list out what permissions you've set. If you ever want to remove the permissions, you can remove permissions from myaccount.google.com/permissions, or click the link here where it says the Google account. And there's more information about the permissions that have been provided within the information dot beside the permissions that are being accepted. So go ahead and allow the permissions. And we are going to need to allow the permissions. So we've got access to the sheet object, and we want to get the values from the sheet object. So let's select the rows of content. I'll give it a name of rows, and within the sheet, we want to get data range. And what data range is going to do, it's going to select all of the available data within the sheet. So this way you don't have to specify how many rows and how many columns of data you want to get. We just want to grab everything that's in the sheet. And this is also something that you got to be mindful of. If you do have some characters that are out and you've got a lot of blank spaces, this is going to throw off, and it's actually going to get all of the square when you do the get data range. So that's the only thing you got to be mindful of when you are using the data range. It's going to pick up any character, and it's going to select the range accordingly to the grid that you've made the selection of. And if you just do get data range, that will get all of the values. And if we want to get values actually within an array format, it's going to return back a multi-dimensional array when we do the get values. So this way, within the log, we should see all of the rows of values that we have. So let's run that one more time and get the content within an array format, and we're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson. So before that lesson, go ahead and log into your Google account, set up a spreadsheet, add in some dummy data. You can have the same column names or different column names. You're just going to have to make the adjustments as we go through the lessons. And then under the tools, go to script editor, open up the script editor, give it a name, and create a function called doGet. You can pass the event parameter. You don't have to. It's not a requirement. But in case you do need to use it, it's always good to include that. And we're selecting the sheet by its ID, then opening it by ID using the open by ID method that's contained within the spreadsheet app class, then selecting the sheet by name. So make sure that the name spelling is correct, and this is expecting a string value for the name. And then rows, and rows is going to use the get data range. So the idea is that we select the range of data that we want to use. Get data range selects all of the available range data. And we want to, what do we want to do with that range? We want to get the values. So when we use the get values method, this is going to return it in a multi-dimensional array. So once you're set up, you're ready to move on to the next lesson where we're going to output this and we're going to create our web app. So that's coming up next.